Well, I just wanted to welcome everybody here. I'm sure we're going to have some more people signing on in a little bit, but I just really appreciate it. We finally have a nice day, guys. So I hope everyone gets to go outside at some point today and enjoy the good weather. Yeah, thanks for signing up for this. Go through a little bit of an interview or introduction to our citizen science opportunities today. And I don't know how many of you guys are aware, but April is actually Citizen Science Month nationally. So there's been a lot of things that were planned and events planned that obviously got shifted over to webinars. So this is the best we can do for today. And I'm really glad that you guys are on board to learn a little bit of something. Just as a little bit of an introduction, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Brent Boscarino. I'm the Invasive Species Citizen Science Coordinator with the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, which is the host organization for the Lower Hudson Prism. I'll be explaining all of that in a second, but I just wanted to kind of introduce myself to start things off. We're going to be communicating with each other through the chat function. So I'm going to sign on to chat, and it would be awesome if you guys could say your name, what interests you about citizen science, and just to kind of break the ice a little bit, we'll enter in your favorite plant or animal in our region. I'll start off with me. You guys can see on the screen here, Jack in the Pulpit. I don't know how many of you guys know about Jack in the Pulpit. That's one of my favorite plants in our region. And love it, like them or hate them, I am fascinated with beavers. So those are my favorite plants and animals in our region. So if you wanted to go to the chat function, just say, here, I'll type a little bit of something in here to everyone. Say, introduce yourselves. Favorite plant or animal. So feel free to type something in there. I'll be prompting you guys to write things from time to time. So I'll just start it off. As you guys are entering in that, we'll keep it going here. I don't know, I come from a really interesting background. I was a high school science teacher for a long period of time, and it was just working with kids during that time was just, it's so awesome to see just like their awe on their face and that sense of wonder for the natural world. Just some of the pictures here that you're seeing on your screen, we did a lot of citizen science work with monarch butterflies and watching their migration patterns. Sampling for eels in the Hudson River was always like a really cool thing for me to do with kids. This right here is a citizen science project that I did in capturing an invasive shrimp that's coming into the Hudson River. And here's us like counting eels. And I think what was awesome about working with kids in a K through 12 setting for most of my career was just seeing the expression on their face and just how they love to explore and just that sense of awe and wonder for the natural world. And I really think that, that kind of that who, what, when, where, why, how process that we go through in the sciences as a science teacher, how does that translate into adult life? And how do we reinvigorate that sense of wonder and awe for the natural world? Well, citizen science can really be the answer. For a lot of people and the adults and volunteers that I work with now, I've really seen that reinvigoration and that passion for nature and exploring and just wanting to learn more and ask questions when you're out and about. So citizen science can provide a great opportunity to sort of reconnect with that childlike sense of wonder that we all had. In terms of what this buzzword is, I'm sure you guys have heard about citizen science or community-based science, read it in the paper or heard through our various programs. But the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is one of the forefathers of the citizen science movement in our country. And their working definition is just projects in which volunteers partner with scientists to answer real world questions. Now, of course, that's kind of vague, right? But to me, citizen and community science really involves data sharing. So it's a dialogue between community members and experts and scientific experts in the field. And the best types of citizen science projects are those that are reciprocal. So there's like a give and take between, the so-called scientific experts and the community members that are on the ground and doing a lot of the work. So there's certainly an educational basis to this. There's a scientific value in what we're doing. And what's incredible about citizen science projects these days is that it's really making science more accessible to people, opening up the dialogue between experts and scientists and the public, and kind of breaking down those barriers that used to exist for a long period of time. What's exciting about it is by getting involved in citizen science projects and that data sharing aspect of it, you're contributing to real research. You can record a range of wildlife without, any necessarily formal training. You can just kind of sign on for webinars like this or take training workshops, and then be able to actually collect data, which then goes to whoever's running the scientific project. Oftentimes, especially with a lot of our programs, you can record and time and take data at your own pace. Most of the projects I'm going to be talking about today are really specialized and focused on what the Trail Conference is doing, but there's so many projects worldwide now that you guys can get involved with and start on your own. And what's so exciting about this to a lot of the adult volunteers is it's not just they themselves are learning, but to know that what you are collecting and what you are doing is going to be used to inform management decisions and to inform conservation decisions. So it's really about, oftentimes researchers and people from scientific institutions have been limited by funding or like certain sites that they're able to work on. But by getting community members involved in citizen science projects, we're able to access private property, to access trails, of course, where people are hiking and enjoy their recreational pursuits, and now contributing data that can drive management decisions. So it's an exciting time. Almost 2 million people now get involved with citizen science projects every year, and you guys can certainly be a part of that. It's also an important time to become a citizen scientist. So, this buzzword of biodiversity, or how many species and native species that we're trying to protect. We're seeing like a real decrease in biodiversity globally. The Living Planet report is a report that comes out every 2 years by the World Wildlife Fund that basically looks at it. It's a comprehensive study of different trends in biodiversity globally. And what we're seeing is that a lot of things are unfortunately trending in the wrong direction. We've seen since 1970 almost a 60% decline in vertebrate species in the world, and actually freshwater populations are the ones that have been most severely hit. Since 1970, we've seen an 83% decrease in species biodiversity globally since 1970. Freshwater fish are the highest extinction rate out of any type of species in the world. And I'm sure you've heard about the Amazon being depleted, where a lot of our biodiversity is centered or around coral reefs, and how climate change is impacting that in the last 15 years. And depending on what metrics that you look at or what type of organism you're looking at, habitat degradation, certainly with rainforest deforestation is a huge cause of biodiversity decline. But and another one is exploitation. I think about fish, for example, and how we pull out fish for consumption or use in aquaculture or even in the aquarium trade. This can drive a lot of the decrease in biodiversity in our world. Netflix, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the Netflix series on Our Planet, but it actually focuses on the global biodiversity decline. And it's easy to get bogged down by that. And we know that invasive species is probably the second or third largest cause of biodiversity decline globally. But here in the United States, invasive species are the #1 threat to biodiversity of our native ecosystems and native species. So it's a real key driver, and something that we as citizen scientists can really take an active role in helping us, #1, to map the biodiversity and native species that we have living in our ecosystems, and things we love seeing out and about while we're on the trails, and actually contribute to a global or local citizen science database to help protect the plants and animals and even fungi that we love seeing while we're out hiking or in our backyards. So in terms of where the Trail Conference fits into all of this, You know, I'm sure most of you guys that are on this webinar today are aware of what the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference is. We're a volunteer-based organization. Without the help of volunteers and all the amazing work that you guys do for our community, we would just not be able to, like, there's so much that we enjoy from the fruits of your labor and working together with the staff to really make a difference in our local ecosystems. We have over 2,000 active volunteers and up to over 9,000 members now from 75 different organizations that log over 10,000 volunteer hours annually for our parks. And I've been part and working with, as part of my Prism, in my Prism role, with a lot of different organizations, and there's just nothing like the Trail Conference and the power of our volunteers and the efforts that they put in to preserve our local ecosystems and our trail systems. We manage over 2,000 miles of trails, including the AT and Highlands Trail, Long Path, you know, so many different parks, up to 190 parks and nature reserves that the Trail Conference manages and helps to protect. A lot of what we've done as a trail conference historically has been developing and building and maintaining trails and protecting our space lands through support and advocacy. And depending on what region you are or what the issues are at the time, really kind of like determines where we put a lot of our efforts and what the volunteers are working on. And certainly education, outreach, responsible use of trails and the natural environment is a key piece of what we do. But I think, you know, until recently, and a lot of people don't realize, that what the Trail Conference does is it helps to coordinate the regional response to invasive species and really put forward efforts to protect local biodiversity in the trails and parks that we manage. And this is another, you know, unfortunately, I work for an organization that has a long acronym. And then within that, I work for the Prism. And a lot of times when I just say that out of my mouth, people think I work for a prison, but I don't. It's a Prism, which stands for Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. And here in the Lower Hudson area, which is essentially like the Lower Hudson Valley, you know, we are in the Lower Hudson Prison area. You can see in this map here that there's 8 other prisms, which are hosted by nonprofits. And the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference is the host organization for the Lower Hudson Prism. We get our funding through this Prism, through the New York State DEC and the Environmental Protection Fund, and a lot of other programs here at the Trail Conference are actually funded through this fund. It's a very important source of funds for us. But we manage and organize the invasive species responses in our area in Ulster, Dutchess, Orange, Putnam, Rockland, and Westchester County, so all the way down to Manhattan as well. But because we are associated with the Trail Conference, we also extend a lot of our programs and our citizen science opportunities for those in northern New Jersey. Because as we know, plants, animals, they don't know state boundaries, of course. So the more that we can understand about what's happening in forests in northern New Jersey, it can also help inform our decisions with how to manage our forests and parklands in the Lower Hudson Prism region, which is New York specific. So we work a lot with New Jersey organizations and volunteers. The Prism itself consists of the Lower Hudson Prism consists of over 50 plus regional partners. And a lot of these are actually individuals. So if you're interested in invasive species management and being part of a collaborative team, you can actually join our Prism network. We have these amazing meetings where a lot of people, like-minded people who love our forests and our trails and our parklands and want to protect our local ecosystems and our trail systems, come together and we share ideas. So some of them are individual members, but some of them are, you know, larger organizations like the New York Botanical Garden, you know, for example, that draws for a lot from the city. And we have lots of partners working together in invasive species management. We also put out calls for funding. So if you have a property or own a property or organization that is overrun with invasive species, you can actually apply for funding and get some of the work done on your property that involves invasive species as well. A lot of what we do is removing and controlling invasive species. So we do this through a conservation corps, through an AmeriCorps program. And these are some of this is actually from 2019, some of our conservation corps members, which really is a great driver of getting a lot done in the trails and parks in our system. They work together with some of the other conservation corps that helps to manage trails. But a lot of what we do in removing and control is volunteer based. So what we're going to go over today is how you can get involved with some removal projects in terms of citizen science, and we'll talk about why it's a citizen science project. A lot of what we do as a Prism as well is in surveying and mapping. We do mapping of lakes. A lot of our invasive strike force, which I'll be mentioning today as an opportunity for you guys to sign up for, is involving the surveying for invasive plants and then along our trail systems and forests. And as I mentioned before, we do a lot of prioritizing and coordinating of that regional response with all these amazing local environmental organizations, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. We all work together towards protecting biodiversity along our trails and parks. A lot of what I do as citizen science coordinator is the teaching, for informing, and education and outreach stuff. So I do do some work with schools and getting youth involved. You know, that is my background as a teacher. I love just getting kids there and all the awesome questions that they have. It kind of reinvigorates even for me that sense of wonder about what we're doing and that purpose, in kind of getting that younger generation excited about using our trails. We do a lot of outreach events with schools. Here's an example of our aquatics team that's doing some boater outreach and education. And of course, our invasive survey program, which is what I'm responsible for running, and just informing the public about what we're about and what our messaging is in terms of protecting our trails from invasive species. And it's not just about managing the invasive species. It's really about protecting our native wildlife and our native plants. So a lot of what we do here is hopefully you guys can see the arrow that I'm circling around here, but this is an invaded system. It looks like maybe multiflora rose or some invasive shrubs that has taken over this forest land. And through the efforts of volunteers and some of our staff, we can bring back a lot of the native plants that have evolved in our region for thousands, if not millions, of years in this part of the world. From the top left here, things like the Indian pole or mayapple, hepatica, to the spotted geranium, or the maple leaf viburnum, all the way to the in this part of our screen. And it's not just about protecting the plants, which are the base of that ecosystem, but I come from a background as a fisheries biologist and a research ecologist, and protecting our efforts in protecting our native forests have served a great deal for protecting things like brook trouts that we are trying to bring back into our streams and people love fishing for, or our native salamanders or bluebirds. I mean, there's so many things that we love seeing while out hiking and in our backyards, and everybody has their own interests and little pet things that they do, but there's so many things that we're trying to protect by kind of keeping our trails and our forests free and clear of invasive species. I already mentioned the monarch butterflies, which are so important for pollination and serving that base of that food web for the things that we're trying to protect. And one of my favorites are bobcats. So everything from mammals to fish to insects to the plants, that is what our role is as a Prism, and driving those efforts and keeping our trails free and clear of invasive species. So first, some definitions before we get into our citizen science programs. So I think it's really important to make a clear distinction between what non-native means and then what an invasive species is. So to be considered non-native, it means a plant or an animal or a fungi that has been moved to this area by process of a human. So we're not talking about natural dispersal. The monarch butterflies, for example, fly all the way down and back from Mexico. We're not talking about that. This is about humans intervening somehow to put and place in an organism that wouldn't have otherwise gotten there into our local ecosystem. And that could be a cultivated species, like an ornamental plant that is native to Japan or Eastern Asia, that we're now planting in our properties and maybe has escaped and become naturalized and now become part of our local ecosystem. That is a non-native species, meaning that it's not, hasn't evolved in this region, in this local ecosystem, right? But just because you're non-native, non-native species does not automatically make it invasive, right? So an invasive species is one that has been moved to a new place by people, but has escaped human control and has caused some sort of harm to humans, the environmental system, whether it's human health concerns. And really, like, what another big one is, even if you're not an eco nerd and care about environmental issues, invasive species cause an enormous economic drain in the management that goes along with managing invasive species that have gotten out of control and have escaped cultivation, or have become over here as hitchhikers on boats or in shipping cargo crates and have escaped out into nature and are now causing problems. I think of the dreaded, I know in my house, I'm like flooded with stink bugs. Stink bugs are an invasive species that came over in cargo of ships and shipping crates from China and are now like all over my house. And they feed on anything that's like fruit and are juicy, and they poop all over my house. They're awful. So that's just an example of an invasive species that was here and brought here by accident, right? Just on shipping crates, but is now causing some sort of harm. So that's what an invasive species is. In terms of how invasive plants in particular cause environmental harm, so they take up space and resources that our native species need, right? So in some way, they have found their niche and some sort of competitive advantage so that they're now outcompeting natives and crowding them out. I'll just show you a couple of different examples. I'm sure most of you guys are hikers and nature lovers, but this is an example of stiltgrass in Turkey Swamp Park around here that is completely taking over the forest floor. This is a complete monoculture of Japanese stiltgrass on the forest floor. There is not much growing under this. Kudzu is another one. It's the vine that has swallowed the South, that has now moved into northern New Jersey and the Hudson Valley, and is blanketing trees and some of our native plants, shading them out from sunlight, stealing nutrients and resources. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen this if you've driven on the Thruway or the Taconic, just these vines just completely covering and blanketing trees. There's no way that there's anything much living under there, and it's swallowing school buses and taking over buildings. So whether it's, bittersweet, oriental bittersweet that's taken on a lot of the trees in this region, or porcelain berry. I know in New Jersey, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen porcelain berry taking over the trees. So this is what happens when invasive species take over our systems. As to why they're so successful, they can tolerate a variety of different habitat conditions. Typically, they can grow and reproduce rapidly, so huge seed dispersal or very seed prolific. Oftentimes, seeds can last, of invasive species, last in the soil for long periods of time. So, even though you think you've eradicated them, it might be that the seed base has lasted for much longer. And yes, I also see that people are contributing to the chat, and I promise, that I will get to questions at the very end. But I see that feel free to ask questions in the chat box, but I will get to them. I see people asking and putting comments on Japanese barberry. Oh, yes, that is one. Porcelain berry on the list. Yes, that is actually on our intermediate list. I'll get to that in a second. But, a lot of the invasive species, they lack natural enemies or predators in new systems. So whether it's an invasive insect that's moved in, well, it takes a while for our native predators to even figure out it's a food resource. They're like, what the heck is this thing, right? But they usually compete aggressively for resources, whether it's food, water, or habitat, and stealing from our native species. A lot of the invasives that have taken over are what are called generalists. Whether they can generally adapt to a wide variety of environmental conditions, or they're, an insect generalist that just feeds indiscriminately on things or can just take over. So there's a lot of different features of invasive species that make it so successful. if you're interested in going more detail on this, certainly I will do this in a upcoming survey invasive species webinar that I'll be giving in May. But I'm just kind of going over this really quickly, just so you can learn about our invasive species citizen science projects and why it's so critical as to what invasive species are doing to our native ecosystems. In terms of why the natives are so important, in general, native plants are going to support a more diverse wildlife. Oftentimes, when you have these monocultures of, say, porcelain berry taking over, and just blanketing, or monocultures of Japanese stiltgrass taking over the forest floor, you know, there's not much in terms of things that in and amongst the leaf litter, or, you know, living within that monoculture that can actually use that type of habitat for its own survival. Most species of native insects, including most of the butterflies that we love, if you guys have your own gardens and create these pollinator gardens, most of those native insects are adapted to just eat native plants. And I'll give you an example of monarch butterflies. I'm sure many of you know, will only eat milkweeds. So native milkweeds are so critical and important to sustaining a monarch population. So not only are these invasive plants crowding out a lot of our native milkweeds, for example, but we have another one called swallowwort, which looks and smells, or chemically is actually very similar to milkweeds. But what ends up happening is it ends up tricking the monarch butterflies into laying its eggs on the swallowwort and not on milkweed. But the caterpillars cannot eat the black swallowwort. And so it ends up being a monarch egg dumping grounds with no chance of the monarchs reproducing. So just a couple of ways that invasive plants, not only can they outcompete, but they can also trick some of our native insects and pollinators into thinking that, you know, it's a good place for me to lay my eggs. So not only do we have this crowding out part, but it's also has cascading effects on the food web, right? So you lose the native plants through outcompeting with some of the invasives. And then that influences the insects that depend on it for habitat and for food. And what we've seen that in the last 3 decades, a 75% decrease in the insect population over time. And this is not only happening globally, certainly, in terms of butterflies and moths and other beetles and stuff that we rely on for pollination. But it's also happening in our local ecosystems. Insects serve as food for many other animals, including birds, right? So I remember from Bio 101, the plants feed the insects, which feed the birds, you know, and then mammals typically are you know, whether you're an herbivore or you're a carnivore, you know, the farther you are up the food chain, the more potentially impacted you are by some of these impacts. So in terms of other impacts of invasive species, as I mentioned before, not only do you have ecological impacts, but big losses economically to forestry industry, agriculture, for example. I'll be talking later about the spotted lanternfly, is an invasive insect that is decimating a lot of agricultural crops and making our recreational facilities and parks in Pennsylvania right now. It's of like plague proportions, this spotted lanternfly. And we're doing the best we can to keep it out of New York State. And there are parts of New Jersey in which we're finding it, but we're hoping to keep it under control. And these are huge losses economically to our tourism industry, forestry, invasive pests. The United States spends $120 billion a year in invasive species management. If you compare that to all of Europe and Australia, it's not even close. Invasive species are the biggest threat to biodiversity in the United States alone. This is a huge issue in our parks, and we can do something about it as both a Prism entity and also and really what we need are the help of citizen science volunteers like you guys. And that's where you come in. It's this whole idea and mentality that yes, we know about these global issues of biodiversity decrease on a global scale. Insects have been decimated in the last 3 decades. But we can do something about it by acting locally. We don't have to be overwhelmed by these big global issues, but we can take a stance and do something as volunteers to become, you know, to actually be the feet on the ground, to provide the data to scientists. The scientists can then communicate with you as to what you need to do or what you can do to help preserve and protect our local ecosystems. So that's where we come in, and now we're going to shift over to talking more about our volunteer programs, but that provides a little bit of context for why this is so important and so critical. We began the invasive strike force within the Lower Hudson Prism as an effort in 2011 to detect and manage the spread of invasive species in our forested parklands in an effort to protect native habitat and our native ecosystems. We have three main goals as an invasive strike force, which is really a volunteer citizen science driven program. It's to collect information about what invasive plants exist, how abundant they are along our trail system. Two, to use that information to identify areas where the removal of invasive species will allow us to prevent them from spreading into uninvaded communities. So not only figuring out what is out there, but then using that data to then tell our volunteers, hey, do you want to help with some of the removals? We have a crew that can also do this as well to help prevent the spread or contain. And depending on what type of species it is, our goals could be complete eradication, or it's control to keep it where it is and prevent its spread for further. Or three, it's scheduling actually work to remove and prevent or reverse the invasion along our trail system. So our first option, and there's a lot of different options that I'm going to give you guys today, is, okay, well, you know, you enjoy going outdoors and enjoying nature. Probably everybody that's on this webinar today enjoys nature in some way. So this is probably the least time intensive. It's totally on your own time. It's called the EcoQuest Challenge. Every month, I will put out a call that's like a scavenger hunt style challenge to search for usually a native species and an invasive species that is something in that month shows a key ID feature like flowers blooming or berries appearing. And we'll use two mobile apps primarily to help us with the IDs. And it's very easy and fun to do. So you sign up for an email list, and I will send out a challenge each month. I'll give you a little bit of a background on the species and what you should be looking for, whether it's in your backyard or on the trail. And then you go out and you take photographs of if and when you see it, or you communicate with me and I get back to you, hey, I think I saw this, what is it? You know, and I'll show you some of those apps today. One of the apps that we use on this is called Seek. Seek by iNaturalist was created by iNaturalist, which is a large online photo database and community. And what it does is it takes your phone, like I've got here, and it uses live image recognition to basically scan the large iNaturalist photo database for image matches of what you have your phone pointed at. So imagine just taking your phone, pointing it at something in real time. It essentially works like a camera function and works like a live barcode scanner that IDs the species in real time. It's awesome. And if anyone has used it for anything in the past, it's amazing. I want to show you guys, I'm going to go to another screen share here to show you like an informational video on how Seek works. And hopefully many of you guys have downloaded it, but if you haven't, we'll go over it right now. Here you go. So I'm going to play a little bit of a tutorial for you guys. And I can see some of you on your screens. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear the video? I just want to make sure that you can actually hear it in addition to seeing it. Okay. Okay. So I just, for the record, I know how you may see a lot of videos up on your right, like of all of our faces. You may need to minimize that so you can see the whole screen. So what he's going to do is he's looking at his phone here to explore nature. And over on this side, it'll show you up on the top of your screen what exactly you're looking at. Right now, it's just saying classes dicots, which is a super broad category of a plant. But if you change the angles and stuff of your phone, it'll work just like a barcode scanner and tell you what it is that you're looking at. So let's continue this. And now it tells it's this blue blossom. So you can hit this little thing after you get the ID, and actually in real time, you can hit the take a picture function, And then it'll tell you, you'll give you an option to go into view the species, and it'll tell you all sorts of things about where it's found and what it is. You can read up on it. It'll tell you where its distribution is in our region. I don't know if you saw that, but let's see if I can go back. But it also tells you whether it's native or invasive. You see how it says native on there for a second? Shows you the range map, its taxonomy. So I know I'm a parent and I have kids at home, and I'm always looking for something for them to do during this homeschooling period. This is an awesome app to use with your kids. You can play it as a game, and you can actually level up and earn certain badges for biodiversity discovery. They give you different challenges to do, so it's a great app for use with kids. So anyway, that'll give you a little bit of a perspective on how to use it. See if I can use this here. Hold on, give me a second here, guys.
I'm still there.
Yep, just give me a second. Okay, so this is our EcoQuest challenge homepage, right? And we put out a call every month. Like this past March was the last. Unfortunately, we're not running any volunteer programs right now, but we did one that was on lesser celandine. I'm sure those of you who are in New Jersey have probably seen lesser celandine and these yellow flowers. It's actually an invasive plant. So we put out a call each month that give you a little bit of information on what the species looks like and how to identify it. And then we use Seek and iNaturalist, which I'll show you in a second, to basically record pictures of it and then to send it in and just post it to iNaturalist. What we get as a result, this is from actually April 2019. Here's our iNaturalist page, and you can see that we recorded over 649 observations of lesser celandine in just that 1 month, all from volunteers taking pictures out and along the trails. And it allows us basically to trace the distribution of invasive species in ways that we weren't able to before, that are like formal survey programs. Like you could be photographing this in your backyard or on private property somewhere and uploading it. And it gives us a good sense of where these invasive species are. So it's pretty cool. The other app that we use is called iNaturalist, and I'll show you how that works. So Seek can actually work in direct now relationship with iNaturalist. So iNaturalist itself is the citizen science database, but you can use Seek to get the observation on your phone, and now you can post directly to iNaturalist from it. And so the way that this works, and you can also post to iNaturalist directly, as opposed to using Seek, you can just use iNaturalist. It's basically the same function. It turns your phone into basically like a camera, and then you can take a photo of whatever species that we put the call out for, and you'll post it. I'll show you another tutorial as to how that works.
Okay, install the iNaturalist app and create an account. Time to get outside and record your first observation. Here's how to do it. Any living thing, like a plant, animal, or fungus, can be an observation on iNaturalist. Once you find something you'd like to record, just tap Observe and take a photo. You can review your picture, then hit Next if it looks good.
So as opposed to Seek, which uses live recognition software, and you get the ID just by pointing your phone, iNaturalist, you actually have to take a picture, and then once you're happy with the picture that you take, you can then hit Next.
To identify it, hit What did you see? If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys saw that, but it has that like, what is this question? So after you take a picture and you hit Next, it says, what did you see? And then you are able to view its suggestions. And usually it's the top suggestion is going to be the one. Now, someone asked about the advantage of Seek versus iNaturalist. Well, Seek gives you an ID in real time, and you don't have to worry about whether you took the right picture or you had the right angle on it. The only problem with Seek is that it doesn't actually post that observation to a citizen science database, but you are able to link Seek and iNaturalist together so that if you do get the live picture with Seek or the live ID, it gives you now an option to post directly to iNaturalist. Or a lot of people are just accustomed to just using iNaturalist directly, and this is the way to actually use it and do it.
If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name. On this observation detail screen, you can add more photos of the same organism or write a note. The date, time, and location have been automatically added. You can also change the geoprivacy of the observation, mark whether it's captive or cultivated.
This part is actually critical, like when you go to the privacy sharing. If you don't want to be known as to where you are or what you're doing, you can always set your privacy to closed. I forgot what it's called, but it's like not open. It's not open. I forgot what the term is, but if you have it open, you can actually post and pinpoint the exact location of where it is. But if you don't want to do that, you can just change the privacy on here. And also, if you're taking pictures like in your yard or something, and it's a cultivated species, you have the ability to note that.
Or add it to a project. Once you're finished, just hit share, and your observation will be uploaded for everyone to see and identify. That's it. Keep on exploring and sharing.
So the good part about using iNaturalist is that you're part of a community and you're actually posting and sharing the data directly. So that's the advantage, is that you're actually posting. Seek is more of an opportunity to just get an ID, and then you can kind of post directly from there. So once, and I've mentioned the fun features of it. In Seek, you can use badges and get badges. It's really good with kids. And actually, the challenge right now on iNaturalist and through Seek is the Citizen Science Challenge, which basically is just trying to get as much, like almost like BioBlitz style. Let's go out in your backyard, figure out what you got back on there, start the challenge. You can earn badges and you can challenge yourself to level up. It's really fun. So I use Seek and iNaturalist both. Again, Seek gives you the live ID, and you don't have to worry about whether you took the right picture, and then you can actually post to iNaturalist. So as to how they're different, iNaturalist is more of a social network of people. So say you weren't getting a good ID with Seek, but and you wanted to just ask a question to the iNaturalist community, you can upload it to iNaturalist, and then you have a whole community of people that weigh in on those observations and can tell you what it is that you're seeing and actually confirm whatever the observation was. So say that you had posted it and the suggestion was, Japanese barberry or something. Like usually within like a day or so, you'll have somebody come in who's an expert and what are called like an identifier and confirm what it is that you saw. And again, as a Prism, if you sign up for EcoQuest Challenge, our EcoQuest challenges, we'll actually see all of those observations that come in within the area that we define for that species. And just to point out here that if you do sign into Seek, you'll see this option for logging in with iNaturalist and sign up for iNaturalist. And that's what I recommend, is to do that so that you can post your observations directly from Seek to iNaturalist. Okay, and we already saw the video on iNaturalist there. So I want you guys to actually practice this. If you have your phones with you, if you want to open up your app right now and use Seek, you can actually open up Seek right now. So I've got my phone right now. I'm opening up to Seek, and you can actually point it at your screen, and it should tell you what species that is that you're seeing. And you'll get the ID in real time in front of you. You should look at the top. It'll say species and something. and then you can hit that camera thing to actually take a picture of it, and you can actually learn about what it is that you're seeing. You can hit view species. Don't post to iNaturalist, because if you post to iNaturalist now, you're going to post something that's on a computer screen. You don't want to do that. But you can use the seek function to actually tell you what it is, which is kind of cool. So hopefully you guys were able to do that and see that. And you know, these apps aren't always, you know, they aren't always accurate, but I found them to be immensely helpful. I don't know if you guys recognize that, but that's another one that you can practice on if you use your Seek or iNaturalist app. This is a dreaded invasive species in our area. I'm sure all of you guys have seen this at one point. And then another one of my favorite natives. I don't know if you guys recognize that, but if you don't know what that is, your seek function will tell you. And if you did it right, you will know that that's a yellow trout lily. One of my favorite natives. All right, so if you want to become an EcoQuest volunteer or interested in learning about this, I'm gonna pose something. Oh yes, someone asked about introduced versus invasive. Yeah, it's just gonna say like introduced, right? Introduced just means that it's brought here. It just means that it's non-native. It's not saying that it's invasive, just that it's non-native, that it was introduced somehow by humans. Okay, so interested in EcoQuest. Just type in your name so that because I'm gonna basically what I'm gonna do is that I will, or you can type in the chat box to send it to everyone, or you can just find my name on there and you can send it to me. I'm gonna basically be capturing this whole chat at the end of the webinar, and so I know who might be interested in it, and I can send you information on our next EcoQuest challenge. So while you guys are doing that, I'm going to move on to our next opportunity, but definitely would love to see who's interested. All right, option number 2 for citizen science is you can actually become an ISF surveyor, invasive strike force surveyor. And again, people are asking a lot of questions about New Jersey, and I will get to those at the end. But basically, we run these programs in a lot of New Jersey, in northern New Jersey. You can become an EcoQuest volunteer. We run it all throughout the state of New Jersey. Even our survey programs run through a lot of New Jersey that we're going to be talking about now. So just because we are a Prism in New York doesn't mean that you can't participate in these. So in terms of an ISF surveyor, okay, so in terms of becoming an ISF surveyor, you can learn to identify a set of invasive plants that are commonly found along the trail and how to record information about their location. So typically on any given year, we will have an indoor session with live plants, and I will run the session. You can see people indoors, and then we have a field ID version. But we're not able to do that this year, so I'm turning it into a webinar. And you're going to learn about 14 common invasive species that are found in and along the trails. And then after that training, you're going to be assigned a 1 to 2 mile section of trail to search for these 14 invasive species. So during the training, you'll learn about the common ID features. This is autumn olive, for example. That's a Japanese knotweed in the background there. You'll learn about how to ID these, and then you're going to go out into the field, and you have all year for the remainder of the year to basically go out there and then take a data sheet with you, and you'll get trained in all of the data taking procedures. And then you go walk that trail section, and then you report back to us as to what invasives, so those 14, that you found in and along those trail systems. So you have a full field season to complete it and return your data to us. I'm the point person for that. And remember that citizen science is really a reciprocal process. I feel like I'm very good at communicating back and forth. You guys have questions, like concerns, I'm happy to respond and get back to you. We then take that data that you guys are giving us on the ground, and we use that to drive a lot of our management decisions. So the first go around, if it's your first time, you'll learn 14 common invasive species along the trail. There's upper level training that you can take once you've shown that you can master that and you feel like you got a good handle on it, or say you're a botanist by training. Certainly you can go right into our intermediate level, which is 11 less common species along the trail. And it's the same thing. You get assigned a trail section. You have the whole year to go out and get it accomplished. Usually 1 to 2 miles of trails for a true beginner who has no plant background knowledge at all takes about, I would say, 8 hours to go out and accomplish. But you have the whole summer and part of the fall to get it done. So some people go out on a weekend. They're like, I'm going to go hike and do this for a couple of hours. Then I'll go back and finish it off like another weekend. So, and then there's the advanced level, which is ISF Blockbuster, which is essentially you learn 27 different species, and it's more of a scientific comparison between them. You'll compare invasives that you're finding in natural areas versus just at trailheads versus highly impacted areas. And then you can search within a certain block area. So that's like really higher level type of stuff once you've kind of gone through the survey, the standard and intermediate surveys. And in 2019 was actually a banner year for the survey program. It was awesome. We had 133 volunteer surveyors on our trail systems and surveyed more than 207 miles of trail for standard invasive species. So, and just remember that for every one assignment, it usually takes like 8 to 10 hours or so, eight hours for that surveyor to complete it. We completed over 1,300 survey hours in just 1 year. Over 18,000 plant observations were logged into our GIS system, which was a 77% increase over the previous year in terms of returns from our volunteers. So the word is getting out. Volunteers are getting better. They're getting inspired. And I'm really, really proud in my first year that it was like that it was so successful last year. And it's really you guys that are making it possible. Data from these surveys is absolutely critical to identify how invasive plants travel, how identifying areas for invasive removals, and to protect the intact or nearly intact habitats. And it doesn't even matter necessarily what stage or age you're at. We have internships available. Lots of people want to start a new career or put it down on a resume that they've completed an internship. And if you're willing to dedicate 80 hours to surveying and walking trails and doing surveys and submitting datas, you can actually qualify for a specific internship if you're willing to commit 80 hours of work to surveying for us. So what we do with that information is that the volunteers go out, it then comes back to us. We put it into our GIS system, and these are like all of the invasives observations in our Lower Hudson Prism area after a survey season, for example. So this is all done with volunteers that we have working with GIS systems and plotting where all the invasives observations are, and just a showing of results. So in Scunnamunk State Park, for example, this might be a couple of different trail assignments. And when we get data back from the volunteers, we put it into our GIS, and you'll see here that these are all trails here, right? And the blue parts are where that surveyor found very little or very few invasive species, but there are some hot spots where there's a lot of invasive species along the trails. And here's a spot where there's almost pristine, no invasives, but all of a sudden there's like some yellow marks in there, meaning that invasives are somehow in this remote natural area, right? So then we can then target and use that information to have our trail crews and volunteer work days to go out and do removal. So here's a section of a trail that on left and right are really pristine and really free of invasive species. But in this one area, you can see that there's garlic mustard all along the trail. So then we can schedule a crew work date and a removal work date in that area to basically, whether it's our conservation core crew that's going out there, and maybe in some cases we might need to use chemicals if the infestation's really bad, or we can use volunteer work days to go out. And in the case of say something like garlic mustard, we can get our citizen science volunteers to go out there and help with some of the removals. So in this case, garlic mustard is something that citizen scientists and volunteers can do to help with removal processes and actually entirely remove garlic mustard from this trail section that our surveyors reported was, here's a highly infested area of garlic mustard, we should do something about it. So that's how the various facets of our citizen science programs can work together. So if you're interested in becoming a surveyor, that is different. So again, the EcoQuest is really iNaturalist based. Becoming an ISF surveyor is really a little bit more intensive. It's at least I would say an 8-hour commitment, but you have the whole year to do it. If you submit it, you learn and you take a training. So interested in becoming an official ISF surveyor and getting an assignment from me of a 1 to 2 mile stretch, and you can take a training with me in an upcoming webinar. And then again, you have the freedom and time to do this totally and completely on your own time when it's convenient for you. And you have like 5 months, 6 months to get it done and return the data to us. And then we put it into our system to help drive a lot of our other programs. So the third option is obviously to become an ISF Crew volunteer. So this, as opposed to the survey work, is really on removing invasive plants. Anyone can participate. You don't need to have any plant background or knowledge. So again, if you're interested in the survey-based programs, definitely put your name in there. And but this is more on removal projects, where we provide the tools, the expertise. We have certain volunteer days that get signed up and you can go. Now, of course, things are in flux right now because of the moratorium on group gatherings, but we don't know what's going to happen in like July or August. We might be able to have volunteer days, but it looks like we're probably going to move towards identifying certain areas that need to be pulled or can use some removal work, and then having volunteers who are interested and engaged, maybe going out and helping with that. We're still working on the details of that, but it is considered a citizen science project because any removal that goes in, especially on a volunteer removal day, is data that we use to say that it's, you know, that it's removed from this area, and now we can keep an eye on it in terms of rehabilitating that area in which the removals happen. So this is definitely a different volunteer opportunity. And look at what we did in Sterling Forest. If you want like bang for your buck, like doing an invasive vine removal, you can see the before and after in the efforts of our volunteers in getting that done. It's pretty rewarding. This is silver vine that took over an actually historical building in that area. So this is the sort of thing you can do in some of our removal projects and citizen science projects. So if you want to type your name in the chat box for removal projects, definitely do that. And again, I don't know what it's going to look like this year, but certainly on an annual basis, this is some, whoops, this has got to be to everyone. Let's see. Yeah, I think that is tuxedo. You're right. Someone just said that. Okay. And yes, and this can happen at any time of the year. Usually the survey program ends in October because you can't see the plants they don't have leaves anymore. But so that usually needs to be done between like May and October time. But a lot of the removals can happen other times a year. Okay. Option 4, and someone just asked a question about actually on the Hudson River. So here you go. Option 4 is volunteering with the Aquatic Invasives program. Okay, so that was a program that was really launched in earnest over the last couple of years. We have a watercraft inspection steward program now where we educate over 10,000 boaters and anglers last year on aquatic invasive species identification and spread prevention. Do a lot of education and outreach, tabling events, and educational presentations. And we do have a volunteer survey training opportunities where the citizen science opportunities come in. We conduct aquatic vegetation surveys and have surveyed over 3,600 acres. And a lot of what we do, as you can see in this bottom picture here, is remove the dreaded water chestnut, which is like taking over a lot of the Hudson River bays and estuary areas. It can be really bad. But things like milfoil are also taking over, and these invasive weeds. There's hydrilla projects that are coming out of Croton. So lots of opportunities to get involved with water-based citizen science projects as well. Again, we don't know what 2020 is going to offer, but typically on an annual basis, you can volunteer with the Aquatic ISF Crew for a day. So you can get in touch with our aquatic programs coordinator, whose name is Lindsay Yoder. And again, I'll say, if you're interested in this, just put down in the chat, so-and-so interested in aquatics, and I'll capture all of this chat at the end of the webinar. But you can do water chestnut removals, and those are usually on specific days. You can use solo opportunities to adopt a lake. So say that you are part of a watershed association, you can get in touch with Lindsay to take on the responsibility of surveying or monitoring a water body on your own. There's also shoreline spotters, which make use of iNaturalist for spotting aquatic invasive species. Or, and again, just joining our iNaturalist project and uploading any aquatic invasive species that you find. So there's a lot of different ways of getting involved with our aquatics programs and getting involved with our citizen science work as an organization. So if you're interested, again, in aquatics, just make sure that in the chat box you say your name and then interested in aquatics too. And I'll just gather all the information at the very end. Okay. Another option for you is not actually something that we as Prism staff are running, but it's in association. It's a Prism funded project through the Ecological Research Institute on monitoring and managing ash. So I'm sure many of you guys have seen on your properties, if you haven't seen it already, the ash devastation that's happening in this region. It's horrible. And so you can help with that process by helping to survey ash trees. And the main thing that we're looking for right now is in an area that has been decimated, the ash trees have been decimated. Are there these survivors, these survivor trees that somehow withstood the emerald ash borer, which is an invasive species, from taking those ash trees down? It's those trees that are those survival trees that we're really interested in learning about their genetics as we try to repopulate and rehabilitate the ash population in our area. And you've seen the woodpecker damage due to, you have the ash borer that's coming in and weakening the trees, and then woodpeckers are stripping the bark down, if you've seen this on some of the trees. So there is an opportunity to have a training. It's called MAMA, or Monitoring and Managing Ash, through the Ecological Research Institute. They're offering webinars right now. If you're interested in learning more about that, please type in your name to the chat box and saying ash. And I will send out information to you following this webinar as to when those webinars are happening, and become a citizen science volunteer to help with tracking ash tree populations. Okay. And last but not least, there's a couple of our Prism-oriented projects in here at the Trail Conference that aren't necessarily citizen science or data-driven, where there's a back and forth. But I just wanted to point out that many of you guys know that we have a conservation dogs program. This is Dia, which is one of our conservation dogs, and this is Fagin. And this is their handler, Josh Beasy. And so this is a program that we started last year, and using detection dogs and Dia and Fagin to be on the forefront of detecting invasive species before they become established and start taking over our ecosystems. Dogs have an incredible sense of smell. They are now on the front lines in working with humans and our volunteers and you guys as surveyors to become surveyors on their own. A lot of these plants and grasses that we work with are really hard to detect with our own eyes, and we're using dogs' noses now to help with that. I had mentioned the spotted lanternfly as one example, as they are decimating a lot of the parks and agriculture in Pennsylvania, trying to keep it out of New York and northern New Jersey. Well, we're employing dogs to go and check out areas of suspected where spotted lanternfly may be. And they're on the front lines of defending this. They're stopping at transportation stops in areas that are being quarantined from spotted lanternfly. They're now trained, Dia is trained in a couple of different invasive plants in addition to spotted lanternfly, so Scotch broom and false slender brome. And so they're performing cargo searches, transportation searches, and also field searches. And if you're interested in this program, they are doing live demos, or they had been. And once we get out of, a lot of the social distancing stuff, are definitely going to be running like informational demos. It's really cool to see the dogs working in the field. And that's definitely something that you can be a part of. And it's more of an education and outreach thing, but just to know that there's the opportunity to see the dogs at work. And it's amazing. They in the demos, they hide this little tiny egg cases in a mason jar of spotted lanternfly in the middle of a forest, and they'll find it. It'll blow your mind. It's crazy. It's very, very cool. And the last opportunity is another one. If you've ever been to Trail Conference headquarters, we have a Habitat Helpers program, which is basically in and around our Trail Conference headquarters. You can help create and maintain native habitats. So you can learn about native plants. You can get seeds and plants for your garden through this process. This is actually entirely run now, not by Prism staff, but by volunteers. And they're going to be starting up soon as we are able to get volunteers in. And again, I don't know what's going to be happening in 2020, but I just need you guys to know that this is an awesome program. It's an annual program. We have great volunteers dedicated to gardening, and it's all native plants. So this is our Trail Conference headquarters. You can see that it's all native plants here planted. And so thinking about landscaping and native gardens, and if you're interested in that sort of thing, you can definitely sign up for our Habitat Helpers program. These are all volunteers just lining that outside the parking lot of our trail of the Trail Conference. And they meet usually, I think they're going to be twice a month, where they get together on a certain day, and they help with the plantings and weeding and stuff. So if that's something that you're interested in, certainly something that you can become a part of. And this is just another look at our Trail Conference headquarters. So if you're interested in that and participating and getting on a list, once this program is up and running again, certainly just put your name, so-and-so interested in Habitat Helpers, and I will get you connected to the right people. So with that, I'm going to leave you with this message of why becoming a naturalist and starting to give back, not just in terms of learning and education, but to knowing and being so excited about exploring and learning about what's around you. A lot of the volunteers that work with us in the citizen science programs have been gardeners their whole life, or they're just hikers who just enjoy nature. And now this is an opportunity for you guys to give back and to not only learn yourself, but actually contribute really valuable data to something that's going to drive management decisions. And I know that it's just, for me as a scientist and with science background, it's just about asking questions and learning and exploring and reinvigorating that sense of wonder about the natural world. So with that, I've kept you long enough. I'm happy to stay on and answer some questions. You guys can feel free to sign off. I will try to do the best I can to go through the chat box now that I have some free time, and to basically see what I can do to get back to some of the questions that wasn't able to before. Let me just get a pencil. Got to write down a few things. And I can start kind of motoring through these chat questions. Thanks for everyone who has attended. A couple of people asking questions about the survey program. So the thing with this, so with the survey-based program, I'm trying to see how many people are still on here. Okay, we still got 22 that are on. Yeah, so in terms of survey program, you can totally work in whatever park that you want to. So you tell me, what park that you're interested in. Someone mentioned about the Shawangunk Ridge Trail. Absolutely. If you're a trail maintainer and you're already on that part of the section, definitely. I'll give you an assignment on that part of the trail. Yeah, and again, just to reiterate, if you want to be an ISF surveyor and you're in New Jersey, we have half of our assignments go off in New Jersey. In terms of similar organizations that collect data or marine species on Hudson River, yeah, our aquatics program is almost entirely on, a lot of it is on the Hudson River and also lakes. It is not for New York residents only. Oh yeah, so people interested in becoming a beginner surveyor that signed up for the webinar on Saturday, May 9th. Yes, that is the correct webinar. The webinar for the survey program, there's one on May 9th for beginners, and then I think the next one is on May 30th. Oh, right. This is a great question from John 4 on, do you coordinate the LH Prism observations with the New Jersey invasive strike team database, which is EDMAPS, not iNaturalist? The answer to that question is yes. So we actually in New York, we use iNaturalist, and then also a program called IMAP Invasives. And we do work with the New Jersey invasive strike team. My supervisor and director, Linda Rolleder, does a lot of this coordination and efforts, and we are in close communication with the head at New Jersey Invasive Strike Team. And though we do use different formats and maybe have slightly different missions, we are absolutely in communication. Susan Steinbrock asked about anything in New York City. Yes, there are areas of the city in which you can survey. Long Island, unfortunately, if you live in Long Island, that is another prism. So that is LISMA prism, and I don't know what their citizen science opportunities are, though. But I will say that regardless of where you are, you can always use iNaturalist to post observations. So again, EcoQuest challenge. There's a question about EcoQuest challenge, and that is seek an iNaturalist base. I answered the question about introduced versus invasive. Yeah, I think I'm actually through most of the question. Adrian asked about why porcelain berry is not on our invasive survey list. It actually is. It's on the intermediate species list. Someone asked a question about what benefit does a swallowwort get from mimicking the milkweed? Yeah, pollination, because it actually will draw the monarchs there and get the pollen stuck on it. I would imagine that that is the main benefit. Even though it's tricking the monarch into laying eggs there, it should help with pollination efforts because you're drawing the adults there. All right, I think I actually went through all of the questions. Wait, no. Okay, now there's more questions at the end. Let's see. All right. Curious about it, Michael. Curious about internships. Can the 8 hours be done on our own schedule? Or are there specific times for this? Totally on your own schedule. Just needs to be done. 80 hours needs to be completed sometime between May and October. Or really, some of my interns like work and help us out in the office through December. What's the INAT project where your observations are gathered? Yes, that is called the shoot, I forgot the darn name. I think you'll find it under invasive strike force. If you type that into iNaturalist, I think it'll be invasive strike force EcoQuest, but I'll send you that information, Tom, as to what the specific name is. I don't have it in front of me. But you can just add directly to iNaturalist and it already automatically collects the pictures. Does iNaturalist, Suzanne asks, does iNaturalist ever differentiate between benignly introduced and harmfully invasive? No, it doesn't, except if you go on to read the descriptions, it might tell you a little bit about that. Tom asking a question about garlic mustard considered invasive. It seems benign compared to knotweed and barberry and kudzu. Garlic mustard, just by sheer resources alone, it just can cover the forest floor and just taking up space, water, and even, garlic mustard in its second year can grow, actually be quite tall and can even shade out some of the more lower lying ones. It comes out earlier and can, so by its early emergence in the spring can actually start to shade out and steal nutrients from something trying to grow under it. I also think we're at a low enough number now. If you guys want to, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question to me directly.
I can ask another question. I was curious, the surveying that you showed before was all, along trails. I mean, this time of year, because, stuff is just coming out right now, you can like walk down a trail and see, acres of barberry because it's the only thing that's green in a lot of places right now. What about off-trail observations? I mean, do you care about that or? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we don't have, there's not as part of the specific surveyor program, we don't have anything there, but that's what the EcoQuest and the iNaturalist observations are for. So you can post directly to iNaturalist without restriction. So that's the only way we have right now of getting observations in a system, or through IMAP invasives, or directly through EdMaps or something. But it's really, we are primarily using iNaturalist to get observations that are off the trail.
If no one else has anything, a sort of related question is, I mean, I've been using iNaturalist for a couple of years, and one of the things that I've found kind of funny about the way I ended up using it is that stuff that you see all the time, you just don't want to make observations for because it's kind of boring. Who needs the 50th observation of a, right? But like for what you're doing, you actually care about, like how much of this stuff is in this area versus this area. So do you, like for this invasive survey purposes, do you encourage people to take like an observation every 50 yards or something like that if there's a huge infestation of kudzu or barberry or something?
Yeah, I think it's just, so we do have an invasive strike force part of iNaturalist that will actually prompt you with questions. So if you took one picture, it will actually prompt you with a question like, how invaded is it, and that sort of thing. So there is an opportunity to do that if you join that specific project. Okay. And unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me. It's invasive strike. It's like invasive strike force something, but I don't know the exact title. So I have to find that for you, and I'll make a note to myself to do that.
All right. Well, looking forward to the survey webinar. Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah, it's totally.
I have a question. With the survey, do you go back once you find it and mark it for the removable? Or?
Yeah, so as a volunteer, you don't, but as a staff and organization, we basically take all the volunteer data that comes back in at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. We put it into GIS, and then we get that map that I kind of showed you of the blue spots and the red spots or whatever. And then we as a team, we meet with like, we have a terrestrial invasive species manager that organizes a lot of the crew removal projects or the volunteer days. And we make decisions based on that data as to where we'll have our removal days. Or we hear from community members, hey, there's this section in Bear Mountain that like really needs attention, and they can apply to get funded or for the projects to go for the following year, and then we can target that area. So I think it's a combination of decisions that we make as a small team, but also hearing from the community and community members getting enough of a critical mass to be like, we have volunteers ready to go here. Can you provide some additional support to make this happen, to have this removal happen?
I'm kind of wondering, I'm in Bergen County, and so the places we would survey would be connected to the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference?
Absolutely. Yep. We have a lot of volunteers that actually are the Habitat Helpers and the Native Plant Society is another group that meets. They meet once a month and have like a lecture series, and a lot of those are their Habitat Helpers. It's the Bergen Passaic County version. So we have a lot of volunteers that are part of this.
If I were doing a survey, I would be doing it, say, in Ramapo Reservoir area or Skylands, or
you can pick whatever park you want, and I'll try and do the best I can to give you an assignment. It's like a lot of people like to do it in the parks that they're really comfortable with, because they're just like, oh, I want to learn about the park I mostly go to, and so you just put it in a request for whatever park you want to work in. Other people like getting assignments in parks that they've never seen before, and this is an opportunity for them to like go out and explore. So it's really it's up to you, and I do the best I can to match up with like what your needs are, where you live, transportation versus interests, and almost certainly we'll find something that'll work for you.
Great.
And I just wanted to ask again about the Harlem Valley and Dutchess Rail Trail system. Is that a part of the LH Prism group?
No, the rail trail is
I know
not.
I surveyed for LH Prism there.
You do. Who's this talking right now?
Adrian.
Oh, hi, Adrian. You survey on the rail trail, huh?
I've done surveys on the rail trail, yes.
Is that part of Blockbuster though, Adrian?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah. So Blockbuster, you have a little bit of leeway to kind of choose your site, so that's why, but it's not part of our standard or intermediate surveys.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else with any questions? There was a question about age cutoff for internships, and definitely I've had people doing internships that are older, and some of them are in high school kids. So it's really a matter of your focus and willingness to commit to 80 hours, and you have the whole year to get it done. So. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm going to capture the chat, and you guys will have like a whole bunch of information. I mean, you'll have all my information. If you think of something and you want to email me, certainly I will do that. I'll take a copy of the chat to make sure I got what everyone's interests are. And I'm happy you guys were able to sign on today and go enjoy this beautiful day that we're having outside. Go use Seek an INaturalist to figure out what's in your backyard.